You talk a lot about prioritization. When you're the CEO of two companies, you really have to focus in on what matters most. What would you say is your number one priority at Twitter right now? It sounds like this is one issue you're thinking about, but what would you say is top of the list?
Conversational health, in incentivizing more healthy contribution to the public conversation. We've seen abuse, we've seen harassment, we've seen people leave our platform because of it, we've seen voices being silenced because of what's happening on the service, and that is number one. Like, we can't build a platform of speech, a platform of conversation, and a service that will remain relevant to people if people don't feel safe to speak up in the first place. So for all those who believe in free expression and all those who believe in free speech, it's critical that we're not utilizing technologies like Twitter to shut down voices and to silence others. And a lot of our policies and enforcement, and now more and more so technology, is aimed at addressing this problem. It's never going to be fully solved because it's one of those things where you just have to constantly iterate, and perfection is not a goal. But we need to give people much better controls over their experience, and we need to do more of the work for them. We need to take away the burden of reporting harassment or abuse. We need to utilize technology better to automatically identify where it's happening or where there's a high probability of it happening, so that people don't necessarily have to see it when they didn't ask to get into the fray as what's brought to them.
How much of it is Twitter focusing on that? How much of it is inviting more conversation from outside parties? And I ask that because for the last few days there have been a lot of headlines around Mark Zuckerberg's piece in the Washington Post about more regulation of the internet. Did you have a chance to see those comments? Would you say they align with your general views? Because you have talked about this issue before.
I think so. Generally, I think regulation is a good thing. It's a net positive, and I think our role as a company should be that of an educator, helping regulators and legislators understand what's happening with technology, the secular trends that we're seeing, that we're aware of, how our system works. And the job of a regulator is to ensure protection of the individual and a level playing field. So as long as we're working together on that, that has good outcomes. I haven't looked at all the specific feedback to Mark's post, but I generally think that there are things like GDPR that have been net positive, not just for our platform, but also for the industry in general, and specifically adds a lot more clarity around privacy. It adds a lot more clarity around how data is being used. And typically a service like ours, our terms of service are a little bit hard to read and a little bit hard to follow, and not necessarily the most customer-focused thing. So GDPR put a stake in the ground to at least bring out some elements that you had a lot more control over, and I think that's a net positive. So if there's more room for that, then yes, absolutely. But we also, there's not going to be any one party that's responsible for fixing this. I think putting too much of that weight on any one entity, whether it be a corporation, individual, a government, is just not going to work. We have to think about it a little bit differently. We have to think about it as a desire. We have a desire. Our purpose is to serve the public conversation. Our desire is to incentivize and increase healthy conversation in that. And for that, we can look much deeper. We can look at what we're incentivizing. We can look at the very foundational nature of the service, and making sure that we're not incentivizing behaviors that would take away from health. And today there's areas where I think we are. So those are the questions that we're asking, and it will lead to some fundamental shifts in how the service works and how people experience it.
So the conversation has obviously evolved on Twitter over the last decade, and the business has evolved. I mean, we went from a business that didn't have revenue to $3 billion in revenue last year. And now we're at a point where the industry itself is looking at what are the driving forces going forward. I say that because, for example, Twitter is moving away from sharing metrics like monthly active users, and you're not alone in the industry in pivoting there. How do you measure success of the business today? What are you looking at in particular?
We want to provide utility to people that's valuable every single day. Our purpose of serving the public conversation, of answering the question, what's happening? That's a question that you ask every single day and multiple times a day. And we want to be measured internally by the value we bring to someone every single day. And we need to make sure that we're not just utilizing that understanding and that goal internally, but that also externally people hold us accountable to that as well. So the move away from MAU is to better align what we want to do and what we want to be and the value that we want to provide the world. So I don't think it's a general movement away from MAU, because there are services that are valuable on a monthly basis rather than a daily basis. And there's some services that are valuable on a weekly basis rather than a daily basis or a monthly basis. So I think any entrepreneur, any leader of a service like ours needs to look deeply at what they're going around and how they thinking about driving their service and their business, and then make sure there's no dissonance between what we say internally and what we say externally.